Welcome to the deep dive, and get ready, because today we're pulling back the curtain on some really fascinating, recently declassified government documents.
Yeah, definitely fascinating stuff.
Our mission is basically to give you a shortcut to being, well-informed about the complex world of intelligence operations and that whole tricky balancing act of government oversight.
And we've got two distinct, but as we'll see, ultimately interconnected sets of materials to explore today.
Okay.
So, first, we'll dig into a 1974 memorandum. It details some pretty intense Senate scrutiny of the CIA right around the Watergate era.
Right.
Then we'll jump back quite a bit to 1963 for a detailed look at, thousands of CIA operational records from their Mexico City station.
Thousands, wow. So the goal here is to pull out the crucial bits of knowledge, right? Helping you understand not just what happened in these different times.
Exactly, but why it matters.
Why it matters, yeah. And maybe how these seemingly separate pieces of information actually connect in some surprising ways.
They really do.
All right, let's dive into these sources. Okay, so let's start our journey, maybe, in 1974. Imagine stepping into the Dirksen office building. It's February 4th, and it's the very first day of hearings for the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities, the Watergate Committee, and they're bringing in CIA witnesses. It must have been a pretty high-stakes moment.
Oh, absolutely. What's really fascinating here, if you think about it, is the atmosphere described or implied in those hearings. You had Vice Chairman Howard Baker presiding.
Okay.
And the agency witnesses, they appeared voluntarily, but, and this is key, the committee absolutely had subpoena power waiting in the wings.
Ah, so it's like a velvet glove over an iron fist, sort of.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. It's this delicate balance of cooperation, but with underlying authority.
The detail that really jumped out at me was about the private counsel for the witnesses being allowed in.
Right.
Specifically, the memo says to keep questioning out of, quote, sensitive areas unrelated to Watergate. That seems incredibly telling.
It really is.
And the memo even notes that the committee counsels, at first, felt they hadn't had enough time to really digest the massive amount of material the agency had provided.
Yeah, voluminous material, I think was the...
Voluminous, right. And they even had to, and I love this phrase, unplug some committee counsel for certain witnesses just to control the information flow. Expert, what does that specific agreement, that whole setup, really reveal about the power dynamics there?
Well, it immediately tells you the CIA was acutely aware of the potential for this to blow up into something much broader than just Watergate.
Right.
They were trying to build fences, which brings up the crucial question. What exactly were these sensitive areas they were so desperate to avoid?
Yeah, what were they hiding?
Exactly. And looking at the testimony summarized in the memo, we get some clues. Take Mary Louise McGillen's testimony, for example.
Okay.
On the surface, it was described as, quote, completely unrevealing. But she did identify a Hollis Whitaker and mentioned her former roommate had information relevant to a Mr. McCord's employment in the agency. Now, James McCord, of course, was a key Watergate figure.
Right. The Watergate burglar with CIA ties.
Precisely. But here's the subtle detail the memo captures. McGillen clarified she had seen McCord in agency headquarters in 1971 after his official retirement in 1970 or 71.
Ah, okay. So the lines are already blurry.
Very blurry. It hints that those sensitive areas might have involved these kinds of ongoing, perhaps unofficial connections. Agency assets or contacts still in the loop, even post-retirement. Then you have Robert Ritchie. He testified for about 65 minutes. The memo says he handled himself remarkably well. Quote, no surprises.
Sounds like standard agency speak.
It does, doesn't it? But it did bring out a sudden TDY, that's temporary duty,
Right.
to Miami HQ right at the Watergate break-in.
Interesting timing.
Very. And there was also some confusion, or maybe deliberate obfuscation, about the date he took a Mr. Martinez, another figure connected to the burglars, to a meeting. Ritchie thought it was March 72, but it turned out to be late April.
Okay, so a date discrepancy. Why does that matter?
Well, it became significant because, according to the memo, a conflict arose among the committee counsel concerning the discovery of Martinez's car at the Miami airport back in June 1972.
Ah.
So, connecting his presence, the timing, the car.
Yeah.
It's those little discrepancies that investigators latch onto. They can sometimes crack open much larger questions about who knew what, when.
Makes sense.
And then Martin Lukansky's testimony. This one is particularly insightful, I think.
Okay.
The committee counsel, a guy named Thompson, he flat out said they were, quote, getting into uncharted waters.
Uncharted waters. That sounds ominous.
It does. He pressed Lukoski about potential CIA relationships down in Mexico.
Okay, now we're seeing a potential link later.
Exactly. Relationships with organizations like the Mormon Church, Summa Corporation, Hughes Tool Company, Howard Hughes Companies.
Right.
Lukoski sort of deflected, suggesting maybe those relationships were actually with the Mullen Company, which is a known CIA friend company.
Ah, okay. So redirection.
Seems like it.
Mm-hmm.
And stepping back to the bigger picture, Thompson also wanted a full explanation of the WH flap. That's the White House flap.
The White House flap. What was that exactly?
It was basically the White House's internal turmoil and reaction around intelligence leaks and certain covert operations. It connects directly to the creation of the notorious Plumbers Unit.
Ah, the plumbers.
I got it.
Established to stop leaks, among other things.
Exactly. Thompson clearly believed Lukoski knew more than he was letting on about all this. And critically, he observed what he called a parallel.
A parallel? Between what?
Between Lukoski's position, his sort of careful answers, and the White House's own resistance to letting the Attorney General fully investigate the activities of those plumbers.
Wow. So the committee counsel is drawing a direct line between the CIA's posture and the White House's stonewalling.
Yes. And the memo specifically notes this parallel was being presented for the first time. It suggests a possibly coordinated defense strategy. Lukoski's testimony overall seemed to track pretty closely with an earlier memo from Senator Baker's office from December 73.
Okay, so when you put all that together, McGillen's subtle hints, Rishi's convenient TDY and date mix-up, Lukoski getting into uncharted waters about Mexico and the plumbers. What's the big takeaway from Lyle L. Miller's final recommendation at the end of this memo? What does that tell you about where things were headed?
Well, Miller, who was the deputy legislative counsel, he basically concluded that serious consideration should be given to advising the DCI, the Director of Central Intelligence, Mr. Colby at the time, advising him about these issues that had surfaced, and crucially, potentially investigating these sensitive CIA matters, but doing it in a secure environment away from the committee's public glare.
So take it behind closed doors.
Exactly. He was concerned that a previous related inquiry had been a sibling expedition.
A sibling expedition, what does that mean?
It kind of implies an investigation that was maybe running parallel or was too closely related to previous activities or investigations, perhaps not fully coordinated. Yeah. And the fear was that probing further, even internally, could inadvertently reveal more sensitive information.
Ah.
So what it signaled to me, really, was this internal acknowledgement that what the Senate committee was just starting to scratch the surface of, well, it was potentially just the tip of the iceberg. There was likely much more beneath.
Wow. Okay, so that 1974 memo gives us this really stark glimpse into the intense pressure of oversight and, the agency's fight to keep things under wraps.
Definitely.
But to really grasp the kind of sensitive operations they might have been trying to protect, we need to rewind, like you said. Let's jump from those tense Washington hearing rooms back to the bustling streets of Mexico City in 1963.
Okay, big jump back.
Yeah. These next sources you mentioned, they're part of the 2025 release under the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Act of 1992, specifically the HM4A series.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you actually look at the transmittal slip that comes with these, you can see these documents have been part of this long declassification process, releases spanning decades, literally from 1975 all the way up to expected releases in 2025.
Decades of slow release.
Exactly. And these particular documents, mostly dating from October and November 1963, just before the assassination, they were specifically requested by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSCA.
Ah, the HSCA. That's significant.
Very. Requested in 1978, specifically asking for Mexico Station activities.
Mexico Station activities, October, November 63, requested by the committee investigating the JFK assassination. Okay, the dots are starting to connect there.
They are.
What immediately stands out here, looking at these, is just the sheer volume and the granularity of the information. It's overwhelming.
It really is.
We're talking hundreds and hundreds of entries detailing really specific operations, communications, intelligence reports, all from just a very narrow window in time.
Exactly. These records, they truly highlight the day-to-day grind of intelligence gathering on the ground.
Right.
And the vast majority, as you expect given the HSCA request, deal with Mexico City and, very heavily, Cuba.
Cuba, okay.
You see countless mentions of Cuban embassy officials, Cuban intelligence, Cuban travel, even things like Cubana passenger manifests. They were tracking movements very closely.
Makes sense, given the Cold War context.
Absolutely. And the documents are just filled with these intriguing internal code names. They seem to represent specific projects, operations, maybe even individuals.
Like what?
Well, you see repeated references to things like, let me see, aquatic, rybat, layfold, probumin, limb odor, elsimprove, copolf,
Yeah.
laebite, dedador, ledvale. I mean, the list goes on.
Wow, that's a lot of code names just for one station.
It is. And the sheer number of them, it really points to how extensively compartmentalized these operations must have been.
Right, need to know taken to the extreme.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It shows how deeply intelligence work relies on that kind of layered secrecy, even internally. And the records, they detail just a huge array of activities, everything from transmittal of Cuban embassy traffic, so intercepting communications,
Okay.
to political activity involving groups like the Mexican Communist Party and prominent figures like Vicente Lombardo Toledano, who was a major left-wing politician in Mexico.
So political intelligence, too.
Oh, yeah. Plus, intelligence reports from various individuals, including one identified simply as Tito. We see operational activities, including things like propaganda guidance and movement control.
Propaganda guide.
And documented meetings, contacts with individuals like Fidel Velázquez Sanchez, who was a powerful Mexican labor leader, Antonio Morin Rodriguez, Zbigniew Samorel, likely Czech intelligence, and Agustin Gutierrez Fernandez. You also find entries about just general Mexican officials, the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, even tracking things like visa applications for Cubans.
It's like a snapshot of the entire intelligence ecosystem in Mexico City at that moment.
It really is. And many entries are marked with these internal processing notes, like sent to FID, probably Files Intelligence Division, or simply deferred, showing the meticulous bureaucratic trails these clandestine activities left behind. Even when they involve highly sensitive matters, there was paperwork.
So it's this incredibly detailed, almost overwhelming picture of daily spycraft in 1963 Mexico City, with a huge focus on Cuba.
That's a good summary, which I think raises the important question for you, the listener, right?
Yeah.
How do these incredibly meticulous, sometimes really cryptic, operational details from 1963 Mexico, how do they actually connect back to those high-stakes, politically charged Senate hearings we talked about from 1974?
Yeah, how do we bridge that decade-long gap? Well, I think the bridge is precisely those phrases we heard earlier. Sensitive CIA matters and uncharted waters that came up in Lukaski's testimony. Think about it. The very specific details we just discussed, like tracking Cuban embassy traffic or noting meetings with someone like Vicente Lombardo Toledano back in 1963.
Right.
Those are exactly the kind of deep, granular operational secrets that decades later, during the HSCA inquiry in 1978, suddenly became potentially crucial puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Pieces needed to understand much larger traumatic national events like the JFK assassination itself. The fact the HSCA asked for these specific Mexico Station files tells you everything.
It's a direct line.
It feels like a direct line, yeah, from that daily clandestine work, the nuts and bolts of spying, straight to high-stakes political accountability years down the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these two sets of documents, viewed together, they really reveal that constant inherent tension, don't they? Between the perceived necessity for intelligence agencies to operate in secrecy.
Right. They need secrecy to function.
And the fundamental democratic need for oversight and accountability.
Yeah.
Senate committees struggled back in '74 to just absorb the voluminous material, and the agency's obvious concerns about revealing more sensitive information. It perfectly illustrates that challenge. These documents, they might seem technical or dry on the surface.
They can be dense.
They can be dense, yeah.
Yeah.
But they offer this rare and, I think, a really significant look into the practical mechanics of clandestine operations. And maybe more importantly, how those operations can cast such a long shadow on history. A shadow that's often only fully illuminated, if ever, decades later, through processes like these declassifications.
So this deep dive, it's really shown us that understanding these big historical events often means piecing together fragments, right? From completely different eras, different types of documents, from those high-level Senate hearings down to these like super granular operational logs. It's almost like a historical archaeology, isn't it? You're peeling back layers of secrecy, one memo, one cable at a time.
That's a great analogy.
Mhm.
And the ongoing process of declassification, the fact that we're still getting releases related to 1963 expected in 2025,
Yeah.
it just reminds us that the quest for complete understanding, well, it's probably never truly over.
Yeah.
There are always likely more layers to uncover, more connections to be made.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe, for you to consider. Thinking about Lukoski's uncharted waters and Miller's more sensitive information, what other uncharted waters do you think still lie hidden within these vast government archives, just waiting for their turn to shed new light on our shared history? The journey of discovery, it seems, is truly ongoing.